Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so nice to see you here. If I say hi, say hello. Hi. Hello. Yes, just a little bit of the room, okay? Okay, so welcome to Wednesday. This is like the first Wednesday of our campus. And don't twice now.
Dialogue moves, Amerta Movement in Indonesia. And she was the principal investigator for the HRC-funded somatic practice and chronic pain network. Recent publications include Moving with Pain, co-authored with Bernie Carter in Frontiers in Psychology in 2021, and Moving and Mapping, co-authored with Natalie Garrett Brown in Urban Sensographist in 2020. And also, Dr. Emma has co-edited several collections, including Performing Process in 2018 with Hedy Blades and Dance Matters in Ireland with Eva McGrath. She is a board member for the Journal of Dance and Somatic Practices and co-chairs its Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Working Group. So today, Dr. Emma will share her bodily experience and creative responses led to new understandings of research, inquiry, dialogue through Amerta Movement. So without any further ado, please welcome Dr. Emma Meehan.
Thank you. Thank you. Good introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
Okay. Oh, so am I in the right place? Yes. Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi. Olivia.
Oh, I can hear. I'm echoing. Is that on the online? Yeah.
Bergema.
So have we people online?
Yeah.
Yeah. A few. Three. Okay. Hello. So yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. I have many things written down, but I'm not entirely sure how much of it we can cover today. So I'd really appreciate help with the timing. Okay. So maybe you can let me know how I'm doing. Actually, what I might do is put my phone here so I can keep an eye. Okay. So yeah, as you mentioned, we've been doing this research together about Pak Prapto and his movement approach, Amerta Movement. It's quite hard to describe this movement practice, but I think it's kind of like a body awareness practice, and that's informing how we move in space and how we relate to other people in that space and to the environment around us. So yeah, I had some personal experiences moving with Pak Prapto that really touched me about, feeling like he created a space where I was able to be an individual while being in relationship with the other people around me. So I was able to maintain my own integrity while also kind of feeling fluidly in relationship with other people. And I started to ask him some questions about that, how did he create this space for dialogue? Because he worked with people from very different backgrounds and cultures. And we spoke a little bit about, could his approach be used for peace building? So that's what I came here to find out a little bit about. And I've been working closely with Mas Anchu, with Diane Butler, and a lot of artists who work closely with Prapto. Unfortunately, Prapto passed away just before I could come here, so we couldn't work with him directly. So what's been really interesting for me has been actually being in a Centre for Religious and Cross-Cultural Studies, because I come from a dance research. So we have, maybe our own set of research methods and values. And actually to work with people from different backgrounds has kind of pushed me to think about how I approach research and what I value. Sometimes when you're working closely with people in your own discipline, you have assumptions that you share and then you don't reflect on them anymore. Why do I do it like this? So actually talking to Mas Anchu and Diane and other people from different disciplines like Javanology has really kind of pushed me to think about, why do I approach research in a certain way? So I'm going to talk about that today. So I was thinking, okay, what is the argument I want to make today? I want to suggest that there's elements from this approach to dance research that might be valuable to other disciplines, and a creative approach to researching. So I hope that will be of interest to you. So the first part is more about this kind of research approach. And then the second part is actually going a bit into the research we were doing and seeing how that was applied, and talking a bit more about dialogue. So yeah, that's what I'm planning to do today. So we'll see how far we get. Oh, we might need slides. Press this. It's up here. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Appeared. Okay. So, okay. So, what I'm going to talk about is what's called practice research in performing arts. And it also has some other names in different countries. Artistic research, it used to be called practice as research, and they took the as out. But basically, it's working with artistic practice as a method and also an outcome in the research process in performing arts. And I just got a quote from Robin Nelson, who was kind of really trying to push for making a stronger methodology from this approach. So he created a model, and he talked about this engagement of thinking and doing, creating new insights and new knowledge. And this was like the model he was making. So this was quite popular in the UK for a time. So it's kind of got three parts. So say if we're talking about Amerta Movement, you have the practice at the top part, and the actual, like say, embodied knowledge. And then down this corner, you have more like critical reflection on that practice. So, for example, you could draw out principles from the creative process. So that's the reflective part. And then over in this corner, you have the external knowledge, things you might read about. So you would layer these things to come to understand your subject better. However, there were, of course, lots of kind of questions and problems with this approach. And one quote here by Pakes, who's a dance researcher, I thought was really relevant. She was trying to say, we have to value what the artist researcher actually does, rather than the cleverness with which they frame something. So, for example, if as a practice researcher you were moving with dance, you're creating an artwork, sometimes what would happen is people would make a great artwork and then afterwards think, oh, I must apply a theory to it to try and validate it somehow. But instead, the idea of practice research is the practice is leading, and we value the artistic process as changing the ways in which we do research. And I thought Borgdorf's quote was interesting because he talks about the different kinds of knowing that might be in practice research. So knowing that something is the case. So when you're analyzing something, you might come to know something about it, and knowing how to do something is what you might practice. I mean, I was just thinking that could be artistic practice or it could be religious practice. So you know how to do that. And then there's a third part that he's talking about, which is not knowing. So the willingness to go into a research process and actually be open to not knowing. So in the kind of creative process of movement, that might be to actually go into the movement practice, maybe putting aside your ideas about that approach, and actually to engage in the movement practice, to be curious about, okay, what's happening as I move, what's happening as I relate to others. So I think this aspect of not knowing is really important. And then Kershaw, who's one of my favorite kind of practice researchers, talked about the profound challenge to establish modes of knowledge production in universities that the creative impulse in practice might at best always produce. So I'm always trying to push myself not to just stay in what's familiar, but to actually let each creative project find its new way of coming to be known. So, you know, it would be quite easy sometimes to rely on familiar approaches, or I might set an established way of writing, but actually each project, I try to come to it in a new way. So that's a little bit about practice research. I think just on a basic level, it's, you know, got the same elements as any other kind of research, you know, like questions or methods. You have to share something, has to have some significance. And this is actually an image from some recent movements we did in Candi Ijo. And you can just about see Mas Agus Bimo in the corner here as we engage in practice. But I think what we're trying to do in practice research that adds to that, I've just been coming to think about it as artistry. So it's, and I think that has two elements. One is creativity and one is aesthetics. So the creativity is like allowing creative practice, imagination, new ideas, playfulness into the research process. So for me, usually I engage with the movement practice, but then I'm often left with no questions. And then I explore those further through creative writing, drawing, continuing to move. So yeah, that's the creative element, is about the process. And then aesthetics, I think, comes more when you're thinking about what to share. So that's like formal qualities. So for example, if my creative research involved writing, I might actually start to think about shaping it before I share it with others. Like, who are the audience? What are the elements of this that convey the research through the form? Or if you're to share, for example, we're talking about a film, thinking about, you know, what way is the camera positioned that relates to the research process? So thinking about more formal aspects. So I'm hoping by the end of this, you might consider using the parts of these in your research. But I'm probably going to focus more on the creativity aspect today. So I have a little task for you to participate. So you can try something. I'm not going to ask you to dance, but it's just kind of in your seat and more like body awareness. And, you know, we've been talking a little bit about whether these movement practices are religious practice. Certainly, people have talked about them as a spiritual practice. So connecting to ourselves, to others, and the environment, and a higher power potentially as well. So during the process of researching Amerta Movement, one of the things I did was I kept track of a lot of instructions that Prapto gave, which related to the idea of dialogue. And so then I started to move with them myself. And then I started to bring in aspects of my own practice prior to working with the Amerta Movement. So today I'm going to give you a little short snippet of that amalgamation. So it's got like 3 elements to it. One is receiving your own body condition, how you're feeling today. The second part is receiving the environment, sensing the atmosphere around us. And then if there's any kind of shifting or moving your position, that's fine as well. So I'm going to guide you through that if you're happy to join.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. Yeah.
Good.
Yes, sure.
Okay, sure. Okay, so the first part is receiving your condition. So as you're sitting there, you can have your eyes open or closed as you prefer. And it's more, this first step to me is about noticing what's happening inside of your body. So that might be your heart rate, because I'm presenting, mine's going to be faster than yours. Might be, you might feel your pulse. What else might you feel? You might feel the muscles in your body. If there's somewhere that's holding, somewhere the tone feels tense or relaxed. And if you need to move those, that's fine. Yeah. Muscles, can you sense the bones inside your body? So that might be just by sitting there, or you might need to feel, okay, where are my bones? There's lots of little bones everywhere in your body. Hands, feet, whole spine. Knees, toes. We also have a lot of organs inside of our bodies. So that gives a 3-dimensional sense to your body. So your brain is in there. You can sense that. Your heart. Even your guts. You can sense that. So this is called interoception, internal body awareness. So that's receiving your condition today, just noticing what's there today. Don't have to change it, just noticing. And then the next layer is receiving the environment. So you might want to open your eyes slightly, see what's in the environment around you. You might notice colors, textures, light. Might hear sounds. And a big one is touch, of course. So you might feel the environment through the chair you're sitting on, the floor, the clothes. You can feel the clothes on your body. So this is all receiving the environment. Might also be having a sense of the atmosphere. Can you sense an atmosphere in the room? Okay. And just for the last few moments, you can let go of that and just see what takes your attention. Is there something inside your body? Is there something outside in the room that draws your attention? Okay. Right. And you can let all that go, and you can shift position if you need or stretch. Thank you for joining in. Okay. Thank you. So you're welcome. So some people are already dancing. So what I'm going to ask you to briefly do for me now, if you're happy to, is actually to write something from that experience. So it's one thing that stays with you from that experience. For example, it might be, okay, I notice I'm sitting in the chair. I can feel the soft texture of the chair underneath me. My feet are sweating. Or it could be more, I feel tension, or I feel connected to everyone in the room. So it could be physical sensations, could be emotion, could be imagination. I imagine that I'm connected to everyone in the room. So just take a minute or two to write something down from your experience. If you have pen and paper, or you can write on your phone. Anyone participating? Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, we have some writers. We have some people waiting. That's okay. Just take a minute, write something down. Okay. So thanks for joining. So I guess I just wanted to give you a sense of how I approach through practice, engaging with the practice, reflecting on it, and then later I'll bring in some more quotes about how I bring that together with the research. But a question I have about writing experience. So as you know, like with autoethnography, one of the questions is about, is it just subjective experience, or is it a source of knowledge or insight? For me personally, I believe that if I'm writing about movement or felt experience, that I have to be willing to be open and honest with my own experiences, but I've also learned a lot from it. As to whether it's personal or not, I think, yes, it is deeply personal. But usually when I'm writing, I find that it connects to the context around me. So everything I experience in my body is also related to my culture, my background, and to the other people in the space, to the political situation. All of these things, I think you can sense through your body as well. So this is my field of study. It's called somatic practices. So it's this kind of thing you just experienced now. It's kind of a body-mind awareness. Often it goes into movement as well. So Thomas Hanna says here, somatics is the field which studies the soma, the body as perceived from within by the first person perception. And he suggests that subjective data must be considered, especially when you're focusing on this kind of practice. And he also says that somatic learning begins by focusing awareness on the unknown. So when you are sitting in your seat, you are engaging in a practice, not already naming what I know, but actually trying to tune into your body and say, what is there? What do I not know about that? What do I not? There's so much happening in a space already. Can I notice what's there? So actually we're learning by going into the unknown, which is also what practice research is trying to encourage us to do. Okay, so I'm going to share with you a little bit of my own writing. So this is when I first came to Indonesia last year. It was a completely new experience for me. I was researching dialogue through movement, but I realized that I was engaging in cross-cultural dialogue because I'd never been here before. I didn't know the culture. Everything was unfamiliar. The food was unfamiliar. The heat was unfamiliar. So yeah, so I started to write quite a bit. So I'm just going to read a little bit here. So this is from September last year. Aware of constant movement of lowering my head to bow to others, making myself smaller. In this space, I don't know the rules. I want to fit in. The question comes up again, how can I be with my difference while in community? How to balance my body, history, and culture with others? How can I meet others while still keeping my difference? How to be honest with myself about tentativeness. So when people talk about culture shock, I was like, oh yeah, it's culture shock. But actually, when I tuned into my own body, I realized it wasn't shock in the sense that I didn't feel frozen, but I felt like awkward and kind of tentative, like, should I do this? Should I do that? So it was more that kind of feeling. So I found the writing helpful to help me find the subtleties of what was happening in my body. And here's another bit from when we were moving on the beach in Parentreatus. On the beach in the hot sun, I feel stuck in my shoulders, awkward, not finding inspiration. It's hard to make sounds, surrounded by the roar of the sea. Sunburn. I'm surprised people are not tired of our company. Mosquito bites. And then it's hard to leave, break the connection. So I realized that it wasn't just the coming into contact for dialogue. Sometimes actually the separating then was difficult as well. So I started to read a little bit about, when your body is uncomfortable, like what's happening. And I found this really great book by Elizabeth Probyn. And she talks about the strain of shame that is the body's sense of feeling out of place. So I was like, yeah, that's it. When I come into dialogue with some new culture in a new space, there's this kind of like shame and awkwardness of I don't fit in here. So she also says, the shame of the cultural outsider is fed by a deep desire to fit in and an abiding interest in being able to do so, to belong where you don't belong. So some of the exploration through the movement was actually just trying to accept that I was different. So our bodies seem to know when they're at ease in a situation, when they know the rules and expectations. And conversely, they also tell us loudly when we're out of our league, fish out of water. So when the first field trip we did was up towards Mount Merapi, to the place of Pak Angeline. And we were invited to move in a non-stylized way. We were welcome to move whatever way we want, but I felt I couldn't move very much. So I sought out floors and pillars to feel some kind of reassurance and support, to feel the weight of my body. I didn't know who I was in space or what was allowed. I was encouraged, and yet it felt impossible. And I was wondering, is this the rules in the space that I don't understand, or is it what I'm carrying with me from my own culture? And so that's a whole other story I'm not going to go into, but certainly I was aware of being in a country with a different religion. So I grew up in a Catholic small town, and I learned different ways, the way women are supposed to behave in public space. And then coming into another religious context, I didn't know exactly how I should place myself. So that was one of the things that came up. So to me, this exploring made me think a lot about dialogue. So if we're going to work with people across religions and cultures, how do we help them to explore and experience what's happening in their body in those encounters? And so I've been going round in circles with more questions. How do we explore the felt bodily awkwardness of encounter, experiencing one's own bodily shame of not fitting in? How can we acknowledge what is going on in people's bodies and minds as part of the process of creating opportunities for dialogue? So I put some pictures there just of some of the context that we were moving in. So there was a 1,000-day ceremony after Prapto died, Buddhist ceremony and a big event. So we were at that. We were moving at night in Parentreatus, and then we were in Pak Citrus place. So like even for this one, I had never seen a Pandoko before. So to even know how to move in that space, it was all unfamiliar. So I guess I'm just asking, when you're working with people who are different, some of these kind of bodily experiences might come up. And how do we deal with that? How do we invite that? How do we explore it? So I wrote down some things that are required of me being in dialogue with another culture, allowing myself to feel the awkwardness of not fitting in, exploring both the meeting and the separating, openness to unknown experiences, allowing my identity, how I see myself in the world, the possibility to change through being in a space with people from another background. So I think this next bit is what I need your help with, because my background is more in dance. And so I've been trying to understand what dialogue really is and how that relates to peace building. So this is, a little uncertain, and I really welcome your perspective afterwards in the discussion. But the way I'm seeing it now is I'm having dialogue with myself, my own bodily experience, what's happening. I'm finding my pathway, my way to be with other people. I'm having a dialogue with the space. What's in the space? How can I be in the space with other people? Having dialogue with other people who bring all their different backgrounds. And in a kind of religious or spiritual sense, I'm having a dialogue beyond that as well. So how does that relate to peace building? So I'm thinking that building the capacity for dialogue is a way to more peacefully inhabit the world with myself and the environment and with others. And I just kind of collected some quotes there, which kind of show how the body is part of that peace building process. So it's prioritizing the relation and vulnerable elements of being human. And Judith Butler, I'm quoting there because she's Diane Butler's sister, who's been part of the research. So Judith Butler talks about the bounded and living appearance of the body as a condition of being exposed to the other in ways that sustain us, but also in ways that destroy us. So in this sense, the exposure of the body points to its precariousness. So it's that kind of, when we're working with people, trying to create a peaceful environment, it's awareness of that bodily precariousness we're putting people into, including ourselves. So just going back to my journal again, I'm going to share a little bit, which was more about when I came back to the UK after being in Indonesia last year. So I wrote, dialogue means trust, taking down my guard, opening myself up to vulnerability, confusion, learning about myself, opening things that I thought were fixed, connecting old and new, losing the past, awkwardness, connecting from the heart. Why enter into dialogue with all its risks and vulnerability, its ability to change you and leave you at a loss? This may be why people stay in silos. It's safer, easier. You don't have to confront yourself. You don't have to open borders or uncover aspects of your history or of your community. Risk, vulnerability, connected, separate, a process of becoming together, coming apart, not separate, but part of this world, might as well let it in. So I guess in the process, I realized we're always already in dialogue anyway. So it feels safer somehow to keep the wall of our separate identities, but we might as well let it in. So the process of attending to embodiment through movement and writing allowed me to understand the practical experience, which I hope will be valuable in understanding and practicing dialogue beyond myself. So Yeah, so then I just wanted to, let's see how we are for time. Okay, that's good. Go back to the Amerta movement. So this is, I think, what the research will unfold more, how the Amerta movement as a practice is supporting dialogue. I feel like Amerta movement, you know, I've read a little bit that's written about dance and peace building. There doesn't seem to be a lot, but it's more the idea that you take a dance thing like a mirroring exercise, and then you get people to connect, and it's like an intervention, and then there's an outcome you can measure at the end. But actually, I feel very different about Amerta movement. It's not relying on creating activities and encounters or choreographies that shift power dynamics. It's more about finding one's own distinct movement path, attuning to myself, to the environment, being in a shared space, and embedding that back into my daily life. So I think more what Amerta movement is offering is a way of thinking as well as a way of doing. So I've just given a few examples there, which I won't go into now because of time. But one idea that Prapto talks about is interdependence. So we're independent and interdependent at the same time. And this is something we can practice through movement. And there was a lovely description that Sandra Reeve, who studied here and lived in Indonesia as well, with Prapto, she spoke about. So he talks about interdependence and the bamboo approach. So she describes it here. Large bamboo growing close together, and yet each cane independent, allowing wind to pass through the spaces between. Close together, not isolated, and yet not leaning on each other. The space and the wind between, allowing new movement, new whispers, new songs. So I think there's lots of practices, there's ideas that can support this process of coming into the bodily encounter, the vulnerability and the openness. And I would like for this research to actually support the artists who are in the field practicing this, but also I hope it might contribute to other fields like yours, so you can tell me afterwards how might it be relevant to your own work. So the last slide is kind of coming back to practice research. So I was really struck by this quote when I read it. It's by Melinda Buckwalter, who's a dance scholar, and she wrote about Prapto's work. And she said, he could dance what was unseen in my culture, the context, the backdrop, rather than a foreground. So if in dance, the foreground is the physical form. So like say in a choreography, it's set sequence of movements. So that would be the foreground of the dance. But actually, she's saying that what Prapto is doing is actually attending to the background. So what's happening in the environment? What's happening between people? What's the energy? What's the atmosphere? And he is moving with the background. And I feel like this is what the research has been asking me to do. Instead of in the foreground, looking at, oh, we're analyzing, this is what the artist said, this is the outcome. It's asking me to step back and listen to the background. What's happening in my felt experience? What's happening between people? And so that's how I'm trying to bring the practice research and researching Amerta movement together. So as a researcher, my experience, which is in the background, moves to the foreground. It's not hidden, but I practice Amerta movement principles as research methods. For example, following Prapto and Sandra Reeve, when am I active? When is it important to be passive? How do I follow my line in the research? How do I find my position? So some of these movement principles are informing how I approach the research. And then I had to think, I went back to Baz Kershaw's description, you know, how does creative practice change how we fundamentally research? And I was thinking, do I want to make a contribution to knowledge? Is that what I'm trying to do? Or a contribution to some kind of knowing? And then I thought, actually, what I want to do is give a contribution to experience. So what I want to do is contribute to the experience, for example, of you who are in the room with me, to give you an experience, something that you can go off with, something that you can see, does this apply to me? And that's what I hope ultimately to be able to do with the research. So that's all I wanted to say today. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Okay, that's a very amazing presentation, and maybe I would like to share about a bit so like everyone maybe can follow, like with your practice earlier, the like how can we be like mindful with our surroundings. I kind of write like I feel my heart is pounding, of course, and I feel like it's kind of heavy in here. I can feel like the streams like go back and forth because I have to like prepare the questions for the audience and so on. So it's like boom, 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 and the atmosphere is that I know like there's like familiar faces in here, and I feel convenient. So that's where I can at least on those like 1 or 2 minutes. Maybe any one of you, if you want to share some. Yeah, so that's what I share, or I can feel about the experience. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I don't mind
Yeah,
the
thanks for
session.
sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
3 first questions. Anyone? Okay. Pak Leo. Okay, Mas Abdi. One more. Okay, one more. Maybe like your experience with. Okay, Mas Jo. Okay, we have 3 questions in. Okay, first Pak Leo, please.
Thank you very much. Presentation will be continue for me, especially the other more session. Let's try to be mindful and aware into our own movement, our own body. Really challenging for me because not get used to that kind of activities. This is probably not to the question, but if you to work together in terms of methodology, because we mentioned several times for dialogue, especially the last part of the presentation, talking about dialogue. And the final question is whether it's something to do with knowledge, knowing or experience, and similarly you're more prone to the experience thing to wrap up the entire process and discussion. I just wonder in terms of the term itself, the dialogue is rooted to the knowledge, rather than you're mentioning about and worrying about the aesthetic issues.
Yeah.
Interspatial movement, understanding space, and so on and so forth. So it's truly dialogue Christian methodological term or discourse. Dialogue is basically platonic dialogue is ideas, logos. Yeah, logos while you are speaking about aesthetic.
Yeah.
So when you're speaking about you sense something and you try to dialogue with other things, probably not doing dialogue because not the connection between logos and other logos, but experience, senses, emotions, grip, mood, and so on, rather than logos.
Yeah.
This is another not necessarily valid question.
No.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for participating as well. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I didn't talk about it today, but Prapto talks about dialogue. So that's the term he uses. And it's like the practice of being in conversation together, but through movement. So dialogue doesn't have to be in the sense of words or, ideas only. But it's that sense, like say when you are setting up a situation where you're in a social conversation together, and the feeling in that space and the sharing and someone saying something, someone jumps in, and it's that interaction together. And so it's physical, but it's also a sense of feeling. That's at least what I'm picking up. So yeah, I've kind of stuck with that word. But like, again, I'm not from this discipline, so I'd be really interested to hear about, yeah, what's the perspective on that word, you know, in your discipline. So yeah.
Yeah, especially because the religious studies, dialogue almost means conversation, speak. You say something, another, and the entry point of understanding is through speaking rather than sensing or rather than having mutual understanding, mutual experience or something like that. Mostly, not necessarily the entire issue. That's why the latest movement of interfaith dialogue started in action rather than really started in conversation. Because not everybody's really in the stage of speaking.
Yeah.
Many are simply practicing, simply understanding, or simply experiencing. Yeah, that's all. That's
Thank you.
Okay, next question. Or do you want to add some more?
No.
Okay, Mas Abdi atau Mas Jo?
Yeah, I think it's, my name is Abdi, and I have already to know that Suprapto is the same person. It has a relation with my favorite artist, Amerta Suryodarmo.
Yes.
I just know that Amerta is after Pak Prapto.
Yeah.
And for long I spent. And I saw the similar approach by using like Amerta and Pak Prapto. And when you mention about the understanding your body, understanding the environment, and allow them to move, something like that. And how the idea of investment and how it is.
Yeah.
I'm curious because when I try to watch as much as possible a video in YouTube about Amerta Movement,
Yeah.
when I saw the poster, and then I feel like the Amerta Movement tends to detach from our daily routine.
Say that again.
To detach.
Detach.
Get rid of daily routine. And the idea of back to nature, moving slowly, people from far away who is forest far away come here to feel the way, feel something that not their everyday life, feel the nature or something like that. But Melati is in other direction, in other point of the part, same point of the partner at a different direction. Right? Melati usually use instead of getting out from the daily routine, Melati trying to immerse with the daily routine and try to breaking it, not moving slowly. Sometimes he moves slowly, but sometimes he just catch it, something like that, like catching the chicken in front of many people. It's so chaotic, but it also shows that we're breaking the movement intentionally and performatively. So my question is, what are the minimum, if I could say, the minimum infrastructure of this cultural dialogue moves to be happen? Because each one of us, and what Leo said about the dialogue, the two of us, is we have its own in Indonesia, it's kosa tubuh. Maybe in English it's vocabulary.
Vocabulary?
Vocabulary.
Like vocabulary, but your body. Your body
yeah.
has certain vocabulary.
Yeah.
Vocabulary.
And how your model of dialogue and how you respond to model response or protect the bodily movement dialogue that actually already happen nowadays in digital world. We have a TikTok. People from different background their dialogue through the, for example, Paroy.
I mean, yeah, like TikTok dance.
We dialogue through this movement through TikTok, even though we never say that it's a dialogue. But we never did task out of the reaction. That's how this model responds to that.
Okay. Okay. Oh, that's many things now for me to respond to. Okay. So the first part about being in nature and moving slowly, and kind of not everyday life. I think that's one dimension of Prapto's work. I think, when you try to tune into your body, sometimes things slow down because you haven't been paying attention to it. So it takes a bit of time, and the movement can be very slow. But actually, it's not always like that. It can change rhythm. But also, he worked in really different contexts. So some were nature, some were Chandi, but also like what we're going to be doing in a Strawung in Solo in September is in the marketplace. So he said, the marketplace is the place for dialogue because people are thrown into the space to be together, to move together, to exchange. So he did move in different contexts as well. So the question about movement and technology, I think is a really interesting one. Actually, Prapto was quite interesting because a lot of somatic practitioners want to remove themselves from technology because they're like, no, we want to get back to just being in our bodies. And if I'm looking at the screen, I can't feel myself and I'm just eyes and just hands. And but actually, Prapto was quite open to technology. He had many phones. So sometimes I asked him one time when he was facilitating movement, how can you focus? Because he'd be on phone and then he'd give someone direction and he said, it's like a practice in attention that if you see all the stars in the sky and you focus on this one, and then you see this one, and then you see that one, and then you try to see all of them. That to him was like working with technology. He practiced his attention while using technology. And he was quite open to you recording him and posting it online and all of that kind of thing. The only thing I would say, I think that maybe what I've seen of TikTok and not being of the generation using it, I don't know, but often it's like set dances. So I'll learn this set of movements and it's spread that way and we're all sharing the same. But actually the Amerta movement is actually to be in my own body and place with my own tradition and background. How can I sense myself in my integrity in relationship with another? So the movement is never set, it's always evolving. So maybe we could do a Amerta movement TikTok with everybody doing that. I don't know. But I don't know if that answers your question, but it's very interesting. Thank you.
So is there any minimum requirement or infrastructure this kind of development, happen?
The minimum requirement.
Because each of us have different vocabulary.
Yeah.
So like when I jumping,
Yeah.
and you are crouching,
Yeah.
and I kick someone,
Yeah.
and how
Okay.
That's recently that 2 days ago in Twitter there is a good example like how there is a disk in Japan and then they try to move their own body.
Yeah.
They feel. And then there's a chaos because one of them tries to kick based on other people,
Yeah.
and then they are so immersed. And in one place, in one scene, there is okay people that do just do the game and predict the dance. So the other is not. So
Yeah. I think that's a very good question. It's always a question I come up against. So, when people say we're improvising and it's free movement, but actually you get into that space and you feel like I can't do any movement in this space. But actually the practice is attuning to that. So there's no set limitation. But I have to listen to my own body, to my own ethics, to what feels good in that space. So I don't think there was a formal limit set, but I always feel limits in a space as to what feels like the right thing to do. But I think it's really interesting because more like, say, in the 60s, there would have been a lot of experiments in free movement, but then a lot of violence happened, assault and things, and then people realized, oh, we can't just open a space where anything is allowed. So yeah, it's an interesting question about a minimum requirement of knowledge of moving in that space. I'll have to think more about that. Yeah, thank you.
Next question, Matthew.
I can also, being one of those things I can relate lots to stuff doing cooperative spaces, trying to figure out for myself and my life. Yeah, really helpful. I wanted to ask about the idea of, because I don't know a lot about the movement. To what extent can people kind of participate without joining? Like, what's sort of, is there sort of a barrier between people who are in the movement and who are out of the movement? And how does that kind of border or boundary relate to the idea of dialogue? Because you kind of dialogue with someone, you have to kind of agree to a certain set of something that you want to, what you are, or potentially depending on your definition of dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how does that work in terms of who can participate in the dialogue in that kind of space? And in that relationship to that, then how has the movement kind of moved since their founder aside? How has that kind of affected them in terms of their relationship with each other and with the outside in terms of their own space for creating dialogue?
Okay. Okay, so who can participate? I think that's a complex question, but I'm just thinking about the settings in which I've participated. So say in the UK, for example, when Prapto would come every year, there would, for example, be a charge to attend because we have to pay for the space and for Prapto and so on. So that would be a limiting factor there. Here, it's less so. Prapto invited local practitioners, covered their costs so they could participate that way. People participated in different ways from what they've told us in Indonesia. Some really wanted to learn the Amerta movement and got very involved. Some would just come to sharing events that he set up. So they would watch the Amerta movement, but then do their own kind of movement, but they were in the space with the other people doing that. In the UK, I've seen settings where, yeah, it's a workshop of people committed to working with Prapto, but then again, open spaces where there might be a shorter open workshop. Sometimes people would just sit and watch. Anyone could join in. There would often be minimal guidance in those, but there was a very strong sense of atmosphere, or he would use sound. So you would get a sense of moving together through that, like very subtle prompts. And yeah, so I think who can participate? The ideal is that anyone could participate, but it depends on a lot of factors, I suppose. And then how since Prapto's passed away in 2019, I guess that's what we're trying to find out, really. We went interviewing people who worked very closely with Prapto and Amerta Movement. People are continuing their practice. Sometimes it's not directly Amerta Movement. They may be working with communities doing different things, but the Amerta Movement is informing, the ideas behind it is informing what they're doing in their community. So I don't know, I hope that the research helps to bring together people who, were working closely with Prapto to have that conversation about where they're going with that. Not all of them are working with the idea of dialogues. That was like our lens as well. So yeah, I don't know. Did that answer it? Here.
Okay, so maybe Professor, I saw you raise your hand earlier.
I did. To go back to an earlier point,
Oh, okay.
we were discussing the meaning of the word dialogue in this context.
Mhm.
And I just thought it might be helpful to say that when Emily uses the word dialogue here, she means physical dialogue.
Mm.
I'm not sure if there's something in the word dialogue and log in particular, which
Logos.
suggests that it's verbal, that it's an arrow interaction.
I mean, Prapto did work a lot with words as well. And, you know, in the area of somatic practices, you know, sometimes you find practitioners saying, oh, we work the body. But actually, to give a prompt, you have to use words, you know? So Prapto worked with metaphors. He'd make a suggestion of something like a word to stimulate you to think, and that would inform your movement. So I don't think for me, words and movement are like completely possible to distinguish.
Yeah.
But yeah, the dialogue is in the space together, the feeling together. Yeah.
So just to clarify it further, the word and its meaning. I mean, sign language, some people communicate, have conversations, dialogue in sign language, purely physical interaction. Yeah, but also a language that we are being spoken in. It is not assigned limited words.
Yeah, it's understandable. It's simply because the term itself is not immune from the context. When we speak dialogue in, let's say, our studies is mostly logical activities.
Yeah.
So that's the point. Yeah, of course, you can shape another meaning of a dialogue and you can do conversation without words, possible. Yeah, but I mean, when we use that term and catch by this setting, we are coming from speaking about interreligious dialogue, having different tension, having different orientation, and oftentimes, especially because it's turned down nutrition and muscle issues that common primarily is words, speaking, written, product, and so on. While we are here having different kind of more performative dialogue. Yeah, it's simply to help us to bridge this different understanding of that. That's all.
Yeah, coming from that background, is, I ever thought as much that I found a way of doing like engaging people and because what we find in context of the talk is that I found it to be interbody dialogue.
Yeah.
Rather than interreligious, intercultural. It's more about body being engaged and make sense of who we are. With many things that include religion, culture, and tradition, so many, but they are all brought into the body being engaged, put into dialogue. And in relation to that, the logos is that, I mean, we hear from those people practicing that body is one, mind.
Mind.
Basically, one of the issues or one of the concerns to begin with the mind and the body. The body is so diverse, with many organs, it is their own right to participate in any body movement. So mind is only one thing, but by realizing mind being given so many functions dominates the body, for some movement that we hear from the practitioners is that pay attention not to be limited by mind and give the organs to do that, engage. I also heard Pak Prapto one day that the fingers have their own experiences. the tools that their own experiences, that the body should take care, I mean, should take into account in engaging the movement, moving the body. And so, in response to that, I think it is a kind of not only interpreting the dialogue, but bringing to the basic form, colonializing the very structure what dialogue is. What we dialogue, what we make the dialogue is the religious, not the person, it's the culture, not the person. So that this like a teach us how to bring it into the very, very basic points that we need in life.
With interreligious dialogue, the participants would be bringing huge amounts of culture, history, ideas into the room, to the table. I think in Amerta dialogue, we attempt to leave as much stuff behind as possible in a physical dialogue. I think that's the main difference.
I mean, it's like, but you can never subtract yourself from what you carry with you completely, but actually you can transform it. So it's like if I'm carrying with me that cultural heritage, growing up in a Catholic environment, what that was like, how I could move in space. I carried that with me. I don't like cut it off, but it has the potential to change. And I have to attend to it and give it some space, bring it into the space, but not like hold on to it too tightly. So it has the potential, some of it might stay, some of it might change. I think
in the middle of an Amerta movement session, you're not going to suddenly refer to a text.
no.
God said this.
No, but culture is embodied, like religion is embodied.
Yes.
So
It's all there. It's all in us.
yeah, don't need to take out the book, it's there.
One of the ideas.
I think so somatic, soma is body mind. So it goes together, but the mind is more awareness. So the body is moving and my awareness is with the movement. So my mind is processing the movement. So they're together. For me, obviously, I do a lot of writing as well as moving. So movement and writing are not separate, speaking and writing. So I guess they're like holistic to me. Yeah.
Okay, next few questions.
Usually like that, can say
Second round.
Yeah, thank you for the great presentation. My name is Reza, and I remember my past experience. I came from Pentecostal tradition. Wow. But then I moved on to Mennonite tradition. But I remember when I was in that Pentecostal church, in one service there was apa KKR itu apa sih bahasa Inggrisnya? Yeah. Revival service. It's very ecstatic. Very everyone expressed themselves in many different forms, many different variations of movement. Also, I am not one to dance.
Okay.
I'm not one who move much, but only little, and maybe in my bed. But I remember at that point, I was very immersed into the the spiritual experience in that point, I started to dance. I mean, my apa namanya ini? My hand, my arms, my body was starting to move. I wanted to say on its own, but I think it's part of myself also. But I start to move as part of my expression, and also other people also move in their own ways, their own forms. What I want to ask is, have you ever tried or wanted to compare this Amerta movement with other movements that is either voluntary or involuntary movements from other traditions? I think it's at least for me, it will be very interesting because in the context of dialogue, because different traditions and different movements will make dialogues. Maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, for sharing that experience. I think it's like a good example of that, being in a space or an atmosphere that allows your body the freedom to move. It's individual, but also connected. So thanks for sharing that. I think, that's probably where this work is also going, I've not thought about doing that before because I was never in a religious studies context. So my focus has been on different somatic practitioners and maybe more like, comparing those. So I'll have to think about that maybe. It sounds really interesting. Thank you.
My name is Danu. My full name Danu Anggada Bimantara. I'm from PSPSR now studies. And for this discussion, I remember I will meet Suprapto Suryodarmo. This is my teacher for the dancing. And then Suprapto, I know he is a dynamic Buddhism and actor, and maybe that become the basis for moving and forming the identity of Suprapto Suryodarmo in Amerta dance. So I have 3 questions for Ms. Mehan. What made you interested in researching to get Amerta from Suprapto Suryodarmo? And 2, where are you interested in being the object of this research?
Say that again.
Okay. Why are you interested in being the object of the research? And 3, if you look at the Suprapto style, like Amerta dance, like simple, like so very, very simple, not very simple, like the movement, not the movement, not vocabulary is not that complicated, but this very, very simple, very simple. Then to what extent do you see that there is an interdisciplinary perspective that across culture, religion, ethnic, and geography from this movement? For example, in Amerta dance. So, like.
What was the last question?
Okay. What extent do you see that there is an interdisciplinary perspective like that cross culture, religion, ethnic, and geography from the movement vocabulary in Joget Amerta?
Oh yeah, okay.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, you're giving me hard questions today. What makes me interested? So first, somatic movement. The first interest for me was what is it to experience my own body from the inside? Because actually often we're pushed to be bodies from the outside to behave in certain ways, to fit in, to like, like for example, I'm really tired, but I'm going to keep working because I have to get this done. So I feel like I lived more in that way of being my body as an object. So when I experienced somatic practices, I could feel my body as a subject, and that opened up a whole new world to me. So that was my first interest. One of the things, so I'm from Ireland and I moved to the UK, and one of the things that really came up for me was about moving culture and the challenges I experienced in that subjective body in moving culture. And then I started to look at practices in different cultures and how culture is embodied. And so then I was started to move a Prapto in the UK, and he was stimulating these questions as well. So that's how I've kind of ended up here, less coming from religion, more from the cross-cultural, but now I'm really interested in that as well. So why am I interested in the object of research? I'm not interested, but I feel pushed by this being my discipline to actually acknowledge that my body's in the research. So I could avoid it. I could do a qualitative research of interviews, and sometimes I do that. But if I'm honest, what often happens is like I'll be left with sensations, emotions that I have to work through after doing research. So instead of ignoring that, I'm just including it in the research. It feels very strong to me. So like when I left Indonesia, it was like quite a big experience. So then I had to move, I had to write. So it was all happening anyway. So yeah, it's not that I want to do that. It's just the way it's happening, And so the last question is about, is there an interdisciplinary perspective in the movement vocabulary itself? I think it is, yeah, because I kind of get the feeling that Prapto is so multidimensional that, he talked about different aspects of the movement. He talked about, religious or spiritual things. He talked about dance, performance, healing. So there's many dimensions to the movement that he encourages people who work with them to follow what is their interest from the movement, what inspires them from the movement. So I think there is an interdisciplinary perspective. As to whether it's a movement vocabulary, I don't think so. I think it's more like principles and values that inform the movement, and the movement can take any form it takes. So, it could be complicated. If you have a dancer who practices Amerta movement, it could be. There's no set vocabulary. I might use it differently because I come from theatre to somebody who works with puppets or masks. So yeah, I'm not sure there's a vocabulary as such, but people may disagree with me on that, because sometimes you go to see people moving Amerta movement and you start to see, oh, there's a pattern here. So we can discuss that. Yeah.
Okay, so Emma, we have like one questions from Diane Butler
Okay.
over here. So she asked, Emma, what do you feel about the idea that Prapto often shared about the being is already speaking in and of itself? And do you think that also refers to the dialogue not only among human beings?
Oh, The being is speaking, yes, I agree with that. And the other part is,
And the other part is, do you think that also refers to the dialogue not only among human beings?
yeah,
Other part.
yeah, for sure. I mean, Diane is an expert herself, so can probably speak better than me. But I guess I'm very curious about the dialogue between humans. But actually, my own experience of working with Prapto was it was more in him creating the environment or atmosphere that allowed the dialogue to happen between humans. So then the dialogue with space and environment is really important. And some of the people we interviewed spoke more about the relationship with nature, the elements. So yeah, I think it's beyond the human. I can't really speak about the religious or spiritual dimension. But maybe Mas Antu can. You can talk about the religious dimension.
The religious dimension of maybe dialogue is not only on human beings, but on nature.
Yeah, I think there's some practice like that. So they do like during the night, during like no one else except he or her in under the tree, in front of the ocean, in the mountain, feeling the water, the wind, to give the energy, to cooperate the energy. The Aksabrata, it's also part of the discussion during the reflection that we get from the people to really to understand the universe, to engage their movements as a way for us to situate ourselves, the self, in the environmental space. The space is never clean. The space is occupied by difference, not only human. You look at it like that.
I just wonder, if I understood. We don't need to. Yeah. Is the question, do animals engage in dialogue with us and with each other and with the environment? I think this is something that humanity has struggled with over the millennia, but I think it has become quite clear, irrefutable in fact, that we are so similar to all the animals that we're indistinguishable, and that the animal experience is compatible with the human experience entirely. So yes, the animals are engaged in dialogue of equal importance to that of humans. We don't all understand each other. I know why this is so, but I think at this point in time, we can accept that it is so. And not so long ago, a very famous philosopher by the name of Wittgenstein, a German man, made a point where he said, if a human being was able to have a conversation, a dialogue with an animal, and he chose a jungle lion, a lion who spends his time in the jungle, and he said, if a human being from the city, perhaps Vienna or somewhere, sat down with this lion, and they spoke the same language, and they had a conversation, so different are their consciousness that they could not understand each other. One would not know what the other was talking about, would not be able to grasp it. And people accepted that idea. Recently, this has been debunked. And I think because mammals, and we are mammals, are mostly configured and concerned with raising children. So we have an emotional configuration, very same as all the other mammals. And this informs our consciousness. Most. So in that sense, what we experience is the very same as the other mammals. Necessarily.
I have one point on that. So dialogue, I think, to reflect from what we during the practices. Dialogue as a practice, as a method, as a principle. So we see that those different, different meaning in dialogue itself. The environments that is present with us is inevitable that we engage with others. But as a principle to engage dialogue, for me like to understand anything, including like by eating flesh, meat of the animals, is to understand that what it comes to me, what the meat comes to me, and what how it means, and how should I respond to it. That's a principle, as a values. So it is what it is like direct us to see
I would say eating the animal is certainly engaging in dialogue.
And if I could meet the animal, I could probably also eat.
That would be an extreme dialogue. The dialogue with the eggs.
Yeah. Okay.
Last 5 minutes. Last question. Yeah, sure. Hello, I'm Amerta. Yeah.
Little bit different with Amerta. Yeah. So I'm curious if in the Amerta dancing movement it is also such a facilitate us to internalize such maybe certain values from the movement maybe or from the founders like that. Is there a certain values that want to bring up or it is still kind of open interpretation or open experience? And also if we do like movement of the Amerta, so do we focus on the movement itself or what happened in our body?
Yeah.
Or we kind of should or also can like interpret our what we feel in our body, and if we have a change to like interpret it, so is there kind of like a certain interpretation or like kind of agreement in the interpretation, or it's really subjective interpretation? Yeah. Because as human, what we experience in our bodies can express in such a chemical reaction in our body, right? In our sweat and our heart, and also maybe tears like that. Yeah. So with that kind of reaction, is there like a certain kind of interpretation and also, or it's subjectively interpreted? And also, I don't know, I get that, I get an insight that maybe even we only dialogue or only do the movement, it could facilitate us to like sharing our feelings, right? Yeah, because as a human in the body, we got some emotional reaction that it's maybe common or similar with each other. So maybe it can be like facilitate us to share our emotion more deeply than with the words. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Good questions. Yeah, I mean, I think there are values embedded in the practice. I guess for this research, I've just been looking at that angle of dialogue. So trying to look at what Prapto said, what people, artists who work with him said, So like, yeah, like one of the artists talked about their role as creating a holder for the space so that people could come together. And how do you create that space for people to come together? So he had kind of developed a set of values around that. So I think it would be a bigger piece of research to try and uncover the values in Amerta movement overall from Prapto. But yeah, maybe there's some I could come to a conclusion about around the theme of dialogue. And then about whether it's all subjective or you interpret it or you engage with the movement. I think for me, when I'm moving, I'm trying to engage in the movement, but my brain, of course, doesn't stop. And actually, we were talking with Rivka about that as well. You know, sometimes I'm in the movement and I'm in nature and this is all great, but other times there's a lot of thinking. And I'm moving, I'm like, oh, this is so comfortable, and oh, those people are looking, and you know. So I guess for me, then the practice is just noticing whatever is happening. But if I could, ideally, I would just be moving, and it would all be very fluid. But that's not what always happens. And then, is it all subjective? It's a good question. I kind of believe we can never know someone else's experience, but we can ask. And then sometimes it happens that there's a connection. So if I'm moving, I try to name those movements as my subjective experience, and then I can talk to others. What did you experience? This is from another movement practice that I've studied. I try not to say, I saw you moving and you felt, or, you know, to interpret, but maybe more to ask questions. What was happening there? I felt as you were moving this. Did you feel that? So we're kind of trying to sense, okay, we're separate, but we are connected in some way. How can we find that place of connection? So, yeah, I think there can at times be a group sense, but I wouldn't always want to impose that. I feel like for me, it becomes then almost unethical, because then I'm saying, I know your experience, you feel this. Actually, I really need to ask you, not interpret you. I need to engage you as a subject as well, not as an object in my world, but be curious about what you actually experience. Yeah, so.
Okay, so it is very engaging discussion with you all. So that's the end of our Way to Stay forum today. So please give applause to all of us. Thank you so much for Dr. Eva for coming here. And don't forget to attend our next Wednesday forum. The topic that we're going to talk about is very interesting. It's about Muslim women and anti-feminist movement in Indonesia. Serem ya. Gitu ya. Okay, so and the speakers is Afifur Rahman from UIN Sunan Kalijaga. So see you next week. Thank you, guys.